GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. As small boat crossings in the English Channel reach a new record, we ask, can Keir Starmer's government actually stop this? And all of this on the day that our Prime Minister is in Berlin. And he says he wants to turn a corner on Brexit. Does that mean we're heading for Brexit in name only? And a controversial book claims that the Truss government were thinking of cutting cancer treatment on the NHS as a means of saving their political skins after the budget. All of that and much more after the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Nigel, thank you very much and good evening. The top stories. GB News can exclusively reveal that more than 20,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel illegally so far this year. The milestone was reached this morning as hundreds more made the journey in small boats from France. It's after 526 people arrived illegally in UK waters in 8 dinghies yesterday. In other news, the Prime Minister says a new UK-Germany treaty will be part of a wider reset with Europe. Sir Keir Starmer has been in Germany to launch negotiations on a new bilateral treaty which hopes to boost business and increase joint action on illegal migration. Speaking during a joint news conference with the German Chancellor in Berlin this morning, he described it as a moment of opportunity to deepen links between the UK and Germany. The Ministry of Justice says the immediate pressure on spaces in men's prisons in England and Wales has eased significantly in the last 24 hours. The latest comments come following the release of new figures yesterday, showing there are just 100 spaces left in male prisons across England and Wales. It comes after the activation of Early Dawn, where defendants in active court cases are kept in police cells until standard prison spaces open up. 3 people have died in a road collision in a Welsh coastal town. North Wales Police says it responded to the incident in the town of Beaumaris shortly after 2:45 p.m. this afternoon. Police attended Alma Street close to Beaumaris Pier, along with ambulance and air ambulance crews. Officers say work's continuing to establish the full circumstances of the incident. Local Conservative MP in Wales, Virginia Crosby, says my thoughts and prayers go out to the victims, their families and their loved ones. The Prime Minister has condemned the violent scene at Notting Hill Carnival, which left over 60 police officers injured. The Prime Minister says, I'll condemn anyone using violence. That's as a man's been charged with attempted murder over the stabbing of a mother at Notting Hill Carnival. 20-year-old Shakil Tibu has appeared in court today, charged with the attempted murder of 32-year-old Cher Maximum. She's in a coma in a life-threatening condition and may have to have her leg amputated. 2 other men have been charged in relation to the same incident. The 3 men are brothers. And a 28-year-old man has been handed a suspended prison sentence after throwing items at Nigel Farage during his general election campaign. Video from the incident showed Mr Farage shielding his face whilst items believed to be coffee cups were thrown towards him. Appearing at Barnsley Magistrates Court, Josh Greeley was sentenced to 6 weeks in prison, suspended for 12 months and ordered to carry out 120 hours of unpaid work. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. Now it's time for Farage.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, I hate to say I told you so, but I did say back in 2020 that unless we started deporting people that illegally crossed the English Channel, the numbers would simply go up. Over the course of the last 2 days, 1,100 people have crossed the English Channel. There was a moment this morning during which there were 11 dinghies at the same time out in the English Channel. We've gone through 20,000 for the year. That is higher than we were at this point in 2022, which was the previous record year that finished up with a total number of 48,000. So that's the trajectory that we're on. Over the course of the next week, we've got 1 or 2 spells of very calm weather. There's no doubt more boats are going to come. Interesting. Keir Starmer's changed the language. I say illegal immigration. Oh, no. Can't say that anymore. Irregular migration is the phrase that the Prime Minister is now using. As if to say, well, it's not really a huge problem. Now, is it? But I wonder, can Labour stop this? Because, you see, I don't think we can unless we get back to where we were under the last Labour government. Under the last Labour government, if you came to Britain illegally, you were gone. You were deported. Blunkett, other Home Secretaries didn't mess about. We were deporting tens of thousands of people a year under the last Labour government. But since then, my view is that the European Court of Human Rights has become much more activist in terms of the way in which it behaves, but the Prime Minister is wedded to it. This was him in the House of Commons in his second speech after becoming Prime Minister.
Let me be clear. There is no need to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. That is not consistent with the values of that blood bond, and so we won't withdraw, not now, not ever.
Well, of course, they both used to say that about European Union membership. I have a feeling this is an issue that'll become a hotter political one as the course of the next few years go by. But you tell me, can Labour stop this from happening? Want your views, please. Farage at gbnews.com or tweet, or X as it now is, #Farage on GB News. I'm joined in the studio by Bill Rammell, former Labour MP and, of course, former Foreign Minister under Gordon Brown, and Kwasi Kwarteng, former Conservative Member of Parliament and, of course, former Chancellor of the Exchequer. Bill, I must start with you. I mean, you know, Sir Keir was in Berlin today. We'll come to some of the other aspects of that. But he did say, he says, we cannot smash the smuggling gangs who perpetrate this vile trade without the help of our partners. But my argument is this. The financial rewards are so enormous that a gang operating out of Dunkirk or Calais can make a net profit of a couple of million euros in a calm week in the summer. Even if you smash one gang, aren't they just going to be replaced by another?
Well, look, net migration as a whole is far too high and is unsustainable, and we need to bring it down. And part of that is tackling the gangs and reducing the boat crossings. But, Nigel, this is day 53 of this Labour government. Yes. It took the Tories 14 years to triple net migration. It is going to take time to bring it down. But part of the way we tackle it is much stronger cooperation with our partners in the European Union. It's getting returns agreements with the European Union. It's intelligence sharing and police cooperation to go at the gangs at source. But all of that is going to take time.
But my response to that, Bill, would be that they can't stop huge numbers crossing the Mediterranean. Why on earth are they going to help us in the Channel?
Well, and that's where I think there needs to be some genuine cooperation and burden sharing. You know, Keir talked a couple of weeks ago about us actually working with the Europeans at the southern border, and in return for that, we get greater cooperation, and we potentially get greater cooperation with the French.
Well, we'll see. Kwasi, I mean, you guys in government...
Yeah, we made a whole experiment.
You know, I mean...
put my hand up and say...
You kind of made this a big statement. Right. We're going to stop the boats, one of Rishi's key priorities, and not a single person Not a single person went to Rwanda against
So when he came out, I think it was in January 2023, he came in, he said his 5 pledges, inflation, growing the economy, all of that. And then he said, stop the boats. And we were amazed because it was obvious that he wasn't going to do that. And we were thinking, why has he said this? And actually, I think it's got worse in the last year. So that was a complete disaster for the Conservative Party. But I think the problem that Labour have is that if Keir Starmer's saying we're not under any circumstances going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, all that's going to happen is that if these people get deported, they'll appeal to the ECHR and they'll win, and we have to bring them back.
But Kwasi, what did
That's
you?
all that's going to happen.
Kwasi, you can talk it. I mean, I firmly believe that the ECHR has become more activist.
Yes.
There was a ruling against the Swiss government not long ago on meeting net zero targets, etc. But your party has no. I mean, the Conservative Party has no position on this.
Look. So we were at 6s and 7s. You know that during the last government. It's very striking that the leadership candidates. Jenrick actually left the government on this issue. He did. And said very openly that unless we're serious about leaving the ECHR, we're not going to solve this. And Tugendhat recently, rather surprisingly, because he's seen as being more on the left of the party, said we've got to put that on the table. So clearly the leadership contenders realise, as I think you do, that if we're in the ECHR, there's very little we can do.
Well, this is. I mean, Bill. I made the point earlier that that last Labour government. I mean, if you came to Britain illegally, your feet didn't touch the sides. You were gone.
I was part of it as a minister. So you look at the situation in 2005, and asylum numbers had got out of control. We then threw the kitchen sink at it.
Yes.
And I was a Foreign Office minister, meeting every week with my Home Office counterpart to push officials to do everything possible to drive the numbers down. You need that kind of...
And you did it.
We did. And you need that kind of serious conservative approach.
But my argument, Bill, is that the ECHR was not as active in these areas back in 2005.
But I still think you can do it. And the real contrast I would make, forgive me, Kwasi, is with the last Conservative government that was interested in gestures and stunts, which is what Rwanda was, which was never going to seriously bring the numbers down.
So I think Rwanda was, if the party had got behind it, and if we'd got it through, I think it could have been effective. But unfortunately, for whatever reason,
2% of people.
Unfortunately, for whatever reason,
well, the idea was that even if a few thousand went, it would act as some deterrent.
But they're clever enough to know if you come thousands of miles across the world and you've got a 2% chance of being sent there, that's not a deterrent.
How, Bill Rammell, were you able to deport people then and you can't now?
Well, I think you can do it now. And, watch this space of the way that we're going to work on this over the coming months and years. And we cannot go into the next general election with net migration at 685,000.
But OK, let's draw a distinction here. I mean, you're absolutely right. The figure that really matters and impacts people's lives is net migration at unsustainable levels. I think we all understand that, whether it's housing, GP services, infrastructure, whatever.
And it already looks like through a series of changes, the numbers are going to come down quite significantly.
Well, that was stuff that, to be fair, Rishi Sunak did bring in some measures to do that.
Belatedly, yes.
But, OK.
I mean, the idea of students coming, bringing dependents, in the end, some of that was dealt with. Things that people like Kemi Badenoch actually campaigned for, but we'll come to that another evening when we talk about the Tory leadership contest. But isn't the point here really that if a court in Strasbourg has the ultimate say over who can and cannot be deported from our country, we effectively have lost control. And the point is, Bill, even though you're right about net migration figures, the anger is on the channel. And it's perceived to be unfairness. You see, I mean, how is it if the Labour government are not going to put people in hotels but put them in social housing, how is it that my son's on a waiting list for 18 months?
It's not going to be in social housing.
That's on the table.
No, because the local authority powers to give priority to local residency will exclude, in almost all circumstances, migrants coming here.
Well, we'll have to see. But, Bill, my point is, this is the thing that angers people. There is a sense of injustice, there is a sense of unfairness. And if your government doesn't tackle it, or isn't able to tackle tackle it. And if smashing the gangs is going to take years...
No, I'm not saying it's going to take years, but we need, you know, and part of what Keir's been talking about with Schulz in Germany today is getting a much better relationship with our European partners, which is at the heart of tackling this problem. I also think moving people out of the hotels. You say that the boats are a real bone of contention. Yeah. I think sticking people in hotels and costing over £5 billion a year is a huge bone of contention.
Well, it is, but equally...
That was huge.
But equally, I mean, at one point, I think 420 hotels were being fully occupied at a massive cost around the country. One or two hotel groups making very big money out of it.
And actually, that was one of the big issues as a constituency MP until about 2 months ago. that was a massive issue as an MP. I mean, you'll remember this. I mean, obviously, I don't think it was as acute when you were there for the reasons we've discussed. But for MPs now, it was a huge issue.
But if you don't put them in hotels, but you put them in private rentals, or you put them in social housing, either or, you're forcing up rental prices.
That's right. So that's why...
Tens of thousands of people.
That's why we were very keen to try and set up third-party, third-country areas to deal with this stuff.
But they've got to be the right ones. So look, when I was a minister, we looked at third countries, but they had to be the right ones and not open to the kind of challenge and criticism that Rwanda was.
Did Rwanda cost 700 million? Because that's a claim that's been made from the front bench. Is that right, 700 million?
That's my understanding.
I don't think it was... But actually, if you house...
Well, you were the Chancellor. How much was it?
For 7 weeks. It wasn't that much when I was there.
We're kind of comfortable.
But
we're 3 days ahead of you at the moment.
But the actual issue was actually the cost of housing them here was billions. I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, obviously, we dealt with Ukraine, we dealt with lots of people who are legitimately seeking asylum. But the actual cost of that is way more than the Rwanda bill, actually.
Well, in short, Bill Rammell, can Labour stop the boats?
I'm not going to say you stop them. I think that was one of Sunak's mistakes, to sloganise on stopping the boats. I think we can significantly and dramatically reduce the numbers, but it's not going to happen overnight.
No. Kwasi, are they going to suffer politically as much as you guys do?
I think they will. I think this is a big issue that's not going to go away. I think the ECHR is a massive albatross around your neck, because if you deport them, they'll just appeal and come back. And I don't see...
Would you leave ECHR?
I think you've got to put it on the table. I would.
No, I didn't ask that.
No. You've got to say, if this and this doesn't happen, we're prepared to leave. You can't just say, oh, we're never going to leave and we'll just take whatever they say willy-nilly. That's not a credible
Despite
policy.
all the noise around this, over 2/3 of British people support membership of the ECHR.
Yeah, they might do, but that's because it's not closely associated with people's minds.
That's what the polling evidence
Bill,
is.
we haven't had a proper national debate on it. I think that's perhaps the point. That status quos tend to have majorities until you have a debate. EU membership perhaps was a little bit like that. Dare I say it?
We'll come on to that.
Well, I'd love to see a referendum on ECHR membership.
And also, it's closely allied with this.
Do you know what? If Brexit's taught me anything, it's that referendums are one of the worst innovations in the British
Well,
system.
you may very well say that, Bill Rammell, but here we are governed by a massive Labour majority. You only got 1/3 of the vote. I'm not so sure. I quite like referendums. But in a moment, we will discuss Starmer's visit to Berlin today, where he wants to have a new treaty. Well, there's going to be a new treaty renegotiation next year anyway. But are we heading for Brino? Are we heading for Brexit in name only? All of that in a couple of minutes.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
An army veteran has become the world's most tattooed woman after a 10-year journey to ink 99.98% of her body. I mean, that's really nearly everywhere. But I wonder, I mean, yes, she is unusual, and you'd know her if you met her, frankly, wouldn't you? But are tattoos acceptable they're becoming more and more acceptable just amongst all of us, aren't they? But what about in the workplace?
99.98% of her body tattooed. Do you think this would affect the way that she is received at work?
I
do affect it would how she is seen at work, just purely because tattoos are still so stigmatised in the workplace. In today's rapidly evolving society, the traditional standards of what is socially acceptable are being redefined. Facial tattoos, full body tattoos, once stigmatised, are increasingly seen as a form of personal expression, and there shouldn't be a barrier to one's professional or social life.
If you are going for a job, for instance, we make up 90% of our minds about somebody within the first 3 seconds. And I have written a book on body language, and the face is just so important. You need to have the smile, you need to be able to read the facial expression, even when we're speaking. Now, if the face is really heavily tattooed, you can't do that.
Jade said that there is still this stigma, particularly to facial tattoos. We do judge people with tattoos, don't we?
We do. Unfortunately, we do, because it's not the norm. And as a human being, we tend to judge what is not the norm. And as Jade says, we are getting much more used to it. It is much more socially acceptable. But a lot of firms will say, if you've got a tattoo, you cover it. We don't want tattoos in the workplace.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A couple of your reactions from home. Mandy says, not a case of can he doesn't want to. He just wants growth and cheap labour, but he'll get neither, just more crime. Strong views there. And Wayne says, mark my words, Starmer will use the illegal boats problem to take us back into the EU via the back door. Well, some strong opinions out there. Now, Keir Starmer has been today in Berlin. He says he wants to turn a corner on Brexit. He makes it pretty clear that we're actually not going to reverse Brexit. We're not going to enter the single market or the customs union, but it does mean a closer relationship on a number of fronts, including the economy, defence, and exchanges. Now, that sounds to me like we're going to be mirroring single market rules without actually being in the single market, which logically, a year or two down the road, leads to an argument, well, if we're accepting the rules, why don't we consider rejoining? Bill Rammell, you have been a lifelong pro-European Union supporter and very passionate and open and honest about that. Is that the path we're going? I mean, effectively, this will be Brexit in name only, won't it?
Do you know, there's part of me that wishes that were true, but it's emphatically not.
Go on.
The seismic shock that Brexit had to the Labour Party, to our voting base, we accept that there is no turning back. But
do you really?
Yeah, I really, really do. You know, certainly in my lifetime, you're not going to see that. You know, maybe 40, 50 years down the road, there might be a different outcome, but certainly not during the lifetime of this Labour government or my lifetime. But we need a better deal than the botched deal that Boris Johnson...
And what would that better deal look like?
It would involve closer working with the European Union. It would involve, for example, a veterinary agreement. It would involve mutual recognition of qualifications. It would involve removing the double documentation.
So harmonisation, basically.
Well, yeah, if it's in our national interest, then yes.
Well, you see, there we are, Kwasi, the whole point. I mean, as Brexiteers, you know, the point was not to harmonise.
So
the point was to be more competitive.
But, you know, for whatever reason, I think they're softening. You know, they're preparing us essentially for a Brexit in name only. They're never going to say, let's join the customs union.
For reasons that Bill says.
But they'll, you mark my words, they'll come up with something and they'll call it the goods exchange agreement or some such formula, and it'll be exactly the same. So they're not so stupid as to say we're going to rejoin exactly the same institutions with the same name, but they'll construct something that's similar branded slightly differently, which in effect will be...
But I can argue, Kwasi, that it's actually rather easy for them to do this because your governments didn't take us away.
No,
I mean, we've stayed with rafts of EU legislation in most of our commercial life.
The big original sin, actually, was the 2017 general election. Because I remember that was called, and the whole purpose of it was to give Theresa May a bigger majority. And she said, strengthen my hand. And once we lost our majority, that was where the treaty, the draft treaty that was drawn up, had all this stuff with Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol, all of that. And had she actually won a majority in 2017, I think we'd be in a very different place.
I think we've got a softer Brexit.
Well, Bill argues it's a botched deal. I don't think even Lord Frost would argue he was given a very bad hand of cards.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe this bilateral treaty as such. I think what this is the beginning of a negotiation for next year.
This is about confidence building
Yeah, sure.
with the
And
European
also
Union. Germany is a vehicle for that, so that when it comes to the renegotiation of the Brexit deal in 2026, we can get something much better. And I think that's manifestly in our national interest.
And Germany's a member of the EU. They can't unilaterally do
No.
That's the whole point.
They are the powerhouse within the European Union.
Well, there was some other nonsense talk today, which I'll get to, but do you accept the basic point that Bill makes, that actually the deal we've got isn't a very good one? The idea that it was oven-ready was nonsense.
No, look. Yeah. So to be fair to Boris and that government that came in 2019, of which I was a member, we could only deal with what we had. And what we had was essentially the skeleton of Theresa May's deal. As I said earlier.
Johnson lied to people. I remember him talking to business people in Northern Ireland, and he said, if there is a border in the Irish Sea, you come back and say...
Actually, the DUP conference.
Yep.
That's when he went to say it.
So there was no way that he could unpick what Theresa negotiated in the time that he had. And that's why we ended up where we were. But as I said, the original sin in all of this was the 2017 general election where we didn't have a majority. And for those of us who sat through that parliament, we couldn't get anything done. There was 2 years of agony.
It's funny,
there was no way we could get anything through.
Whatever you guys call early general elections, it doesn't seem to work out terribly well, does it? Moving on. One of the biggest nonsenses pronounced by Starmer today was on EU defence. And I've long been very worried about this. I've been worried about the emergence of the European Defence Union because I don't see how we can be in that and NATO. I've never believed we can serve two masters. But Starmer said today, and as nations with the highest defence expenditure among European countries, as if to say, well, this deal with Germany is only just now paying 1.5% of its GDP on defence.
Yeah,
what is Starmer on about?
In terms of direction of travel, you compare Germany today to, say, 5 years ago, and it's moved significantly, and it is now leading the pack alongside the French within the European Union.
No, it's not. Poland's miles ahead.
We need all EU countries to spend more on defence.
But if we want the Americans to be our friends and allies, which is vital, it's pretty clear, when Trump says you guys should be paying the 2%, he's got a point, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has, but it's grotesque in the manner he makes it. And when he says to Russia, if they don't pay in, pay up, come and get them.
But it shifted
that's frankly atrocious.
But isn't that just the way Trump negotiates? Isn't he right that in a world that's much more dangerous than it was compared to 5 years ago, 2%, I mean, surely it should be more than that, shouldn't it?
Technically, he's correct. We need, we're aspiring to move back to 2.5% of GDP, which we had under the last Labour government, which was slashed by the Tories. We need all European Union countries to get to that level, because we do live in a much more dangerous...
No, we do.
It was cut in 2010 under Osborne in the Treasury.
Yes, it was.
Because we had to consolidate the budget. We were running a 160 billion deficit.
It's all about priorities.
And in order to do that...
It's all about priorities. And we've slashed our armed forces.
You're right. We've got a new priority. But I think going back to the Trump point, he did actually force the Germans... Through his crude methods, you can say that they weren't very sophisticated.
I think the Secretary-General Stoltenberg rather liked Trump, because he did actually help people pay a bit more money.
It definitely shifted the dial.
Back to the political point here. Am I right to be concerned about the emergence of a European Defence Union? Can it run in parallel? Can Brussels have two command centres?
I don't see how it can. I mean, as you said, you can't serve two masters. And essentially, given our NATO commitments, I don't see how they can sit... squarely with this EU defence
But you can have much greater intelligence sharing. You can have much greater
Five Eyes is way better than anything the EU
logistics
has.
cooperation.
Five Eyes.
And give me a for instance where European defence cooperation has come up in contradiction to NATO. I can't think of one.
Well, that's because it's still emergent. You know,
it's been emerging for about 10 years.
Yeah, and it's been very slow because of the reluctance of European countries to put any money in to their defence budget.
Can I just make an intelligence point?
Do.
The effective instrument, if you like, the effective machinery of intelligence is through Five Eyes. It's through our cooperation with Australia, with the US, Canada, and those powers. The EU, in terms of intelligence gathering, is not particularly effective.
But that's really good, but it's not mutually exclusive.
No, I mean, look, I think that's right. I think cooperation, sharing things, that can be all to the good. Yeah. My concern, and you're right, it's been incredibly slow. My concern is a fully militarised arm of the European Union. I think the Americans say, you know what, you guys, good luck, get on with it. We'll come back to this and debate it for years to come. In a moment, you chuck cement at Nigel Farage, not a problem. Absolutely not a problem. You don't go to prison. Say something nasty or intemperate on Facebook and you will get locked up. What's happening with our criminal justice system? All of that in a couple of minutes.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Thursday will be a breezy and showery day for northwestern areas. Elsewhere, though, dry and feeling fairly warm in the sun. But it is going to be a fresher day tomorrow compared to today. That's as this weather front is expected to clear away to the south and east throughout tonight, taking with it some rain, which will affect northeastern areas of England, some eastern areas of Scotland through this evening. Still a few showers across the north and west. But for many of us, it will turn much drier and clearer overnight tonight, so that does mean it's going to be a fresher night. Temperatures will fall away into single figures rurally, towns and cities just about in double digits. So fresher but bright start to the day for many areas. However, across the north and west there will still be some quite frequent and potentially quite heavy showers. Across many southern areas we could see a few patches of mist and fog developing, particularly across western counties of England. A few showers pushing into parts of Wales potentially, as well as northwestern England and Northern Ireland. But I think the most frequent and heaviest showers will affect the Western Isles, the Highlands through Thursday morning, and they'll likely linger through much of the day. A drier start across eastern areas of Scotland. Those showers will progress eastwards to affect these areas later on Thursday, as well as some eastern areas of northern England too. But elsewhere, as I said, it should be a relatively dry and fine day, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine. As I said, it is a fresher day tomorrow compared to today. We'll lose that humid feel, so temperatures just about 23 or 24 degrees at best in the south and east, widely in the high teens or low 20s. However, that's about average for the time of year. Now, Friday we've got high pressure centred across the UK, so a more widely settled day. Plenty of sunshine through the day away from the very far north of Scotland. And it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine, but it could be another fairly fresh start. And that theme continues into the weekend. However, as we head towards Sunday, a risk of showers does develop across the south and east. See you again later. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
So there I was, innocently going about my business in Barnsley, early in the general election, and we were on the bus, and I could see a bloke, fairly unkempt, and I saw him take a cup. And by the way, don't believe the news when they say they threw paper cups at me. You can throw as many paper cups at me as you want. And anyway, they wouldn't go across the street. That story is utter rot that's been published. What he did it was a bit of a building site, and he filled up a big coffee cup with cement and chucked it at the bus. And you can see me here in the picture, on top of the bus. Boom. Now, this guy did this with intent and intent to harm. Believe me, I can take the rougher tumble of politics and I don't mind it one little bit. But when it threatens me physically, or it threatens people around me physically, then I think something has to happen, because that was the second time in 3 days. 2 days before that, I had a milkshake physically chucked in my face. And if we get to a point where people can't go out and campaign for what they believe in, and yes, be held to account by a crowd on a street or whatever it is, we've got a real problem. And I must admit, after Barnsley, even I began to think, how am I going to get on? You know, what am I going to do? How do I walk around street markets? What do I do? Well, it turns out that 28-year-old Josh Greeley today has got a suspended sentence and a fine of a massive £85. And I'm sorry, but I think there needs to be some sort of disincentive. So we'll begin this section on law and order with guys that have stood for election, taken more than their fair share of abuse. Something wrong here, Bill, isn't there?
I'm really genuinely shocked by this decision. You know, it's not a popular view, but I actually think violence against MPs ought to be a particular crime. 13 years as an MP, I was only fearful for my safety once. It's now an everyday experience for MPs, and I think it's got to be clamped down on really, really hard. And I think 85 quid and a suspended sentence is utterly wrong-headed.
Yeah, I mean, the Speaker is very aware of this.
Yeah, look, I think Bill's
this.
100% right. I think it got worse. I mean, I was elected in 2010. By the end, by 2024, it got a lot worse. And I didn't know Jo Cox. I mean, she came in after I entered the House. And she was very popular. And, of course, that appalling crime. And then the person I did know quite well was David Amess. Yeah. He was a friend. He didn't have an enemy in the world.
One of the most easygoing political figures, very popular.
And I remember 6 weeks before the attack, I remember speaking to him, and his ambition was to be Father of the House. And we were joking about that. And then 6 weeks later, this attack happened. And that really shifted my view. Joe in 2016, and then David in 2021, two colleagues had been murdered. And I think things have got to change. And if they don't change, we've got to think
the public are very unsympathetic to all this stuff. Yeah. But I would say to you at home, who are not very sympathetic about public money being spent protecting MPs, don't at the same time moan about the quality of people going into politics. Because you can't actually have this both ways. Moving on from that, we had consensus there, which is very dangerous, and we can't be doing that on this show for a moment. Moving on from that, we have hate crimes, we have the proposal that Labour may toughen up on it. We even have non-hate crimes, which are still recorded by the police. If Josh Greeley had written something beastly on Facebook, he would be in prison. And I've seen so many double standards over this. The riots in Southport and elsewhere were unforgivable. But equally, 61 police officers being assaulted at the Notting Hill Carnival. I don't think there's any difference, frankly, between those two sets of crimes. And I do worry, Bill, that it just seems the mood music from Starmer and from Labour is there's going to be a cracking down on free speech, however we define that.
Well, I've got some concerns about this. Look, I'm a strong champion of free speech. As a university vice-chancellor, I championed it. As higher education minister, I stood up for the right for the Oxford Union to invite Nick Griffin of the BNP to the Oxford Union, because I think the best way that you challenge and expose extremism is through free and open debate. I also learnt, overseeing the Prevent strategy, that in defining a line of what's acceptable and unacceptable, violence and advocacy of violence is the only line you can draw, because anything else unravels and is unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are things that are being... I mean, I do agree to a large extent that what is said on Facebook or wherever it is should be the same as us talking, and incitement is above and beyond. But do you just get the feeling, Kwasi, that free speech... I mean, we've had the boss of Telegram arrested by the French authorities. Are you worried about this?
I'm worried about it, because I think the problem that we have is that you've got a government, I'm not saying it's a Labour government or any government, it's any government, who are basically making the rules. And the suspicion out there is that people are just essentially just going to promote the views that they think are acceptable and deplatform, effectively cancel the views that they don't agree with. And that's the suspicion, and that gets to a very dangerous place, because essentially you're bringing in censorship. And it is a form of control that is used in totalitarian dictatorships, and that's the thin end of the wedge. I'm not saying we're going down that route
but look,
at a rate of knots, but that's the problem.
There's inconsistencies and double standards, frankly, in all parties. You know, the Tory party is in favour of free speech and open platforms until it's someone that they disagree with.
Who did they disagree? Who did we cancel?
Well, you know, the strong campaign that anyone, and I disagreed with them, but chanting pro-Palestinian slogans on a demonstration.
Yeah, but that was an incitement. I mean, the issue there, the point you very carefully made, is that incitement to violence is one thing.
Well, from the river to the sea,
exactly.
You know, it's unacceptable.
I fundamentally disagree with it.
Do you?
If you actually, however, believe in free speech, I think people have a right to hold that view.
But how?
It's wrong.
Well,
but
hang on a second.
It's disagreeable.
I mean, from the river to the sea.
How is that not
violent?
How is that not
implies the abolition of Israel and the people within it.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with it.
Yeah, but how is that not violent? You made the point.
But hold on, you've got a right to, you know, express that view.
But you drew a line, which I think is very good, between incitement to violence. Yeah, and that to me is incitement to violence.
And this is where it's subjective and tough. One last point on this topic. Yesterday, we were down to 100 prison spaces for adult males in the whole of the country. And it seems that prison sentences are getting shorter and shorter. We learnt of 147,000 potential crimes in the year up to March, who just got community notices. Do we need to build more prisons?
Yeah, we do. And look, you know, we can debate about what the inheritance of this Labour government is, but prison places is emphatically the responsibility of the last government. Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, went to Sunak virtually every week saying, I need to build new prison places or I need early release. And Sunak disgracefully just sat on the problem.
I think Bill's got a point.
Look, I think you're right. I mean, you will know, I mean, you mentioned the fact that I was Chancellor, but one of the big challenges is public expenditure, and building prisons costs a lot of money. And you can see why Sunak, who had been a Chancellor, really did that.
Is there no political advantage in building prisons?
I think there is, but you don't get to see... The problem is you can't just build them overnight. So if you have a prison building programme, you're committing a lot of capital in the short term, and you only get the places in the longer term.
The capital was there. The money was allocated. The bigger problem was NIMBYism of the then government not being prepared to override local objections to the building of prisons.
So I think there were capital constraints, and we had all this business.
Well, again, it's about choices. Again, it's about choices. All these things are. Do you think, Bill? I mean, presumably Labour are going to have to build prisons.
Yes.
It's just going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the ways we're going to do it is by making this a national infrastructure priority, which can override local objections.
Well, and the same will apply to housing as well.
Yeah.
It'll be
because we desperately need more homes.
It'll be interesting to see where the money comes from. I mean, we're going to have a budget in the autumn. We'll see exactly what the tax take will be, and it'll be very interesting to see what spending choices are made.
That certainly will. I'm going to say thank you to Bill Rammell for joining us and engaging in an energetic debate. I'm keeping this Kwarteng fella here because...
I'm in detention, am I?
Well, you will be. There's no question about it. Because there's been a book published overnight making accusations that the Truss government considered cutting NHS cancer treatment to save their own political skins. In the dock, in just a moment's time, is the man who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at that moment. Did Kwasi intend to cut cancer care on the NHS? We'll ask him in just a moment. Now, that's a really good tease.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Is it time that we actually stop paying for royal security full stop? Is it right that taxpayers fund the security of everyone from Queen Camilla to Prince William? Because there's lots of commentary that perhaps Prince Andrew having his security removed is sort of a first step towards trying to get him out of Royal Lodge.
Well, I mean, that's what King Charles is hoping to try and do, is to sort of try and subtly strong-arm him out of Royal Lodge and into another property, which happens to be Harry and Meghan's old house, Frogmore Cottage. He's resisting, shall we say, any attempts by the King to actually go of his own accord. He says he signed a lease. He said the lease is cast iron, and that's where he's staying. So the King says, OK, you know, he's taken away his security. He believes he doesn't need to have this round-the-clock 24-hour protection. The only security, really, that the taxpayer should be paying for, the King believes, is just himself, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, because obviously they are the heirs.
But they are billionaires, aren't they? I mean, they could afford... Isn't Prince William a billionaire? He could afford his own security. Is there a legitimate question about whether or not the British taxpayer should be... But the only reason I ask is because, you know, you look at what Harry and Meghan are up to. They've just been to Colombia, presumably footed the bill themselves, or maybe Colombia did.
I think Colombia invited them.
OK.
They ended up, well, Prince Harry, shall I say, ended up costing us, the taxpayer, over $1 million in Home Office legal fees with that silly case that he brought, demanding that we do pay for police protection for him. So, I mean, he's not a good example. But do they deserve it? Yes, of course they do. It's the King, and they generate, I mean, 80% of the income that they generate goes back into our coffers, goes back into the Treasury.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A new book is out, Truss at Number 10, How Not to be Prime Minister, and it's written by political biographer Anthony Seldon. It's a 330-page book, which is a pretty excoriating account of Truss's days in Downing Street. Now, the point I want to make here is that Anthony Seldon has a very big reputation as a political biographer, and that is why what has been said here is being taken very seriously. After the budget, there were some enormous problems in the markets, etc. You all remember. The accusation is, it's about meetings that are going on in Downing Street. At that point, they were joined by fellow special advisor Alex Boyd, who was told that Truss and Kwarteng were thinking they could still sort out the black hole with severe cuts. We've been told they're looking at stopping cancer treatment on the NHS. Now, I found this quite extraordinary when I heard it this morning. But when it comes from the pen of Anthony Seldon, a renowned biographer, I thought, wow, can this really be true? And Kwasi, is there just a scintilla of truth in this?
No.
You were considering that you were in a hole, you had to make cuts.
That's right.
Things were difficult.
That's right.
Some issues in the pensions market had erupted.
All of that. And we did look at savings. We did look at expenditure reductions.
So where did you look?
But we did not look at treatment of cancer.
Where did you look?
We looked at, general capital projects, transport projects. I think the Prime Minister was very keen on general government. I mean, this happened under Boris. We looked at the civil service numbers and things like that. But I don't, not that I don't remember, I can categorically state we never talked about reducing cancer treatment. Why would, I mean, it would have been absurd politically to have done that anyway.
Earlier on today, you said, I wasn't involved in any conversations about restricting healthcare.
That's true.
But that doesn't mean the Prime Minister and her team didn't discuss this. You're chucking her under the bus.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I'm not doing that. That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry,
very careful.
I think so.
I was very careful in my wording.
It didn't look very careful to me.
It was. I said I didn't have any of those conversations, but if those conversations took place in other bits of the government, I wasn't privy to them. I didn't know about that. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, Seldon is a renowned biographer. This is quite a claim, isn't it?
Yes, I'm surprised that he made that claim. And also, it wasn't sourced. I mean, I think the official or the special advisor they quoted said we were looking at expenditure cuts. I don't think he said that we were specifically looking at reducing cancer treatment, which would have been an outrage. I mean, it would have been morally wrong and politically stupid. So I don't.
Are you going to fight back harder against this?
Well, I've said I didn't have those conversations, and that's all I can say. I can only speak for myself. I didn't rule out the conversations in the wider government, but I'd be very surprised if those conversations took place.
We have a budget coming up, end of October. I thought the things can only get worse speech that we saw yesterday from the Prime Minister. What do you think they're going to do?
I think they're going to try and do two things. They're going to try and reduce expenditure, but that will be very difficult given the public sector wage.
So you can freeze.
They'll do all the things with the thresholds. They'll freeze the thresholds, and taxes are going to go up, and they're going to try and freeze spending. But to be brutally frank, if the Conservatives had won the election under the Sunak-Hunt administration, they would have been looking at doing fairly similar things. Because we wouldn't have done the deal with the unions. I don't think that would have happened. But if growth rates are at 0.5, 0.7% even, and your public sector expenditure is going up 5, 6, 7%, you've got to cover that somehow. And if you go to the OBR, they will say, ladies and gentlemen of the government, you have to increase taxes. And that I think was one of the things that we try to get out of that doom loop that Liz Truss and she called it the doom loop. We try to get out of that. We have to grow the economy. We have to grow the economy.
Well, Starmer says his priority is growth.
Yeah, of course he does. Yeah, it has to be. Because if you don't grow the economy, all you're going to end up with is rising taxes, which in their turn kill economic growth. So that's the doom loop. It's a vicious cycle.
I mean, Jeremy Hunt, who followed on from you, seemed to launch a war on unearned income. We discussed this with John Redwood and others last night. We saw the Conservative government bringing in rules about non-doms. We're seeing, and we saw under a Conservative government, young entrepreneurs, people in their 30-somethings, leaving the country, being tempted by tax deals in Milan and Lisbon and all over the place.
Yeah.
Why was a Conservative government doing that?
So, look, we tried to do a different path. The markets reacted badly. I think we weren't steady enough. I think we panicked. And essentially, we threw, dare I use the expression, the baby out with the bathwater. So instead of actually going down a pro-tax-cutting route, we ended up with the opposite. And the consequence of that is we can see what's happening. We can see that entrepreneurship is being discouraged effectively through higher taxes. Younger people are going abroad.
They're leaving.
Because they can earn more money or keep more of the money they earn abroad. And once they did the sweetheart deal with the public sector and the unions, it's inevitable that you're going to have to find the money from another place.
So freezing of thresholds.
There'll be freezing of thresholds.
Continue.
So my big fear is that they will... Because when you look at the tax system, we're kind of maxed out. You've got VAT at 20%. They can't increase that. You've got top rate of tax of 45% at 125 grand a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but in London doesn't go that far. And so you're going to have to look at other types of taxes. And they've hinted that with the VAT on private schools. But that's more of a kind of class war
which they will
do. And then you're looking at capital taxes. You're looking at taxes, so-called mansion taxes. You're looking at inheritance tax increases, maybe lowering thresholds. That's the sort of ballpark that they're playing in because the demands of the public.
And yet, effectively,
inexorable.
And yet, effectively, you're really saying it wouldn't have made much difference if the Tories had won.
Well, look, I think the path that we were on, given what happened with myself and Liz and all of that, was very much framed by the OBR, framed, dare I say, by officials. And it was very striking to me that we'd argued against abolition of non-dom status for 12 years, 13 years, and then we brought it in. So that said to me, well, hang on a sec, who's driving this? Is it the ministers or is it the officials in the department? And I think Labour will argue that they're just continuing from what the last 2 years of the Conservative government was.
Maybe what Starmer's done by saying we're all doomed is the tax raising won't be quite as bad as we feared.
I think so. I think
isn't that the plan?
I definitely think there's expectation management, which we didn't do. I mean, when I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, we had that leadership contest, and we didn't do that, and that was a cause of the problems, one of the causes of the problems we had. So he's managing expectations. He's saying that, look, I've got a big stick and I'm going to raise your taxes and be very mean. And then in the event, he can say, look, it wasn't that bad, I just raised your taxes a little bit.
I think that's the game they're playing. And Kwasi, I do absolutely believe you when you say you weren't going to cut NHS cancer care. Sure. But it was worth debating and arguing. Jacob, I'm sure you're thrilled that we're getting closer to the European Defence Union.
Oh, delighted. Absolutely delighted. Well, what's so interesting about the beginnings of this government is that you can't believe a word that Keir Starmer says. And he does U-turn after U-turn. So when he says that he has no plan to take us back into the European Union, and then you see him sucking up to the German Chancellor with lots of European flags flying, you know that he's trying to do exactly the opposite of what he's pretending.
Although Bill Rammell was on the show earlier and argued that actually, even if we align ourselves, rejoining at this stage is not an option.
You tie yourself in so closely that you are effectively a member. And then you argue we're a member without a vote.
And they'll rebrand it. They'll call it different things. They won't call it the customs union.
What else are you discussing, Jacob?
Well, that's going to be the first thing. Then illegal immigration, because the Labour Party's reclassified it.
Irregular migration.
Right.
Yes,
that's exactly the point. Starmer, again, is very confused. He says he wants to stop illegal immigration. Yeah. Well, he's done that by declaring it legal.
Yeah.
Whereas if you came over on a boat under the Conservatives, that was in itself illegal, and therefore your asylum...
Yeah, and you still stayed, of course.
Right, but now you're legal. Yeah. And so it's all nonsense. The dishonesty of it is what is, I think, so surprising, that they simply aren't being straight with people. Now, a new government should be the most honest government.
No, well, I have to say, Jacob, on the subject of irregular migration, it's all really too much. It's the end of my hour. I might even go for a glass of something. Let's have a look at the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Thursday will be a breezy and showery day for northwestern areas. Elsewhere, though, dry and feeling fairly warm in the sun. But it is going to be a fresher day tomorrow compared to today. That's as this weather front is expected to clear away to the south and east throughout tonight, taking with it some rain, which will affect northeastern areas of England, some eastern areas of Scotland through this evening. Still a few showers across the north and west. But for many of us, it will turn much drier and clearer overnight tonight, so that does mean it's going to be a fresher night. Temperatures will fall away into single figures rurally, towns and cities just about in double digits. So fresher but bright start to the day for many areas. However, across the north and west there will still be some quite frequent and potentially quite heavy showers. Across many southern areas we could see a few patches of mist and fog developing, particularly across western counties of England. A few showers pushing into parts of Wales potentially, as well as northwestern England and Northern Ireland. But I think the most frequent and heaviest showers will affect the Western Isles, the Highlands through Thursday morning, and they'll likely linger through much of the day. A drier start across eastern areas of Scotland. Those showers will progress eastwards to affect these areas later on Thursday, as well as some eastern areas of northern England too. But elsewhere, as I said, it should be a relatively dry and fine day, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine. As I said, it is a fresher day tomorrow compared to